It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. Hello, and welcome to Monster Mondays. I'm Geoff Arbuckle, co-host of the podcast Film Seizure, that you can catch each Wednesday morning at filmseizure.com or at a number of podcast providers online. This week, it's time to return to the strange and peculiar world of Japan and Tsuburaya's Ultra Q with Episode 7, S.O.S. Mount Fuji, and Episode 8, Terror of the Sweet Honey. Now, one of the really great things about doing these types of episodes of Monster Mondays where I get into a TV series is that it does give me a little bit of a break. I mean, I don't mean to sound like I'm coming off half-assed or anything, but I don't always have to go into as much background. If you want to know more about this show, I would recommend that you check out some of the earlier Monster Mondays episodes where I covered Ultra Q and get into some of that background info. And for this, I can jump right in. So let's do exactly that. In S.O.S. Mount Fuji, Yuri and Ippei are investigating the rise in thermal temperatures in the Mount Fuji volcano area. Now, our awesomely serious and mysterious tone narrator tells us that Mount Fuji hasn't erupted in 250 years. Now, 250 years doesn't seem all that long ago if the volcano itself has been around for about a millennium. As Yuri talks to a local scientist who is also studying the possibility of this eruption, there is a loud explosion that startles Ippei. And it was just some kids playing with a rocket that failed to launch properly. And we learned from a friendly but kind of doofy policeman that the people of the nearby village where these kids come from don't really take his warnings about Mount Fuji all that seriously. He explains, though, that about 80 years ago, he heard of a similar rise in temps that occurred, but nothing of any kind of consequence seemed to come from it. Now, one thing that Yuri and Ippei pick up hearing about is this legend about a man named Takaru. Now, he's kind of similar to your general Tarzan type of fella. When he was younger, he was kind of enamored with insects and got lost after chasing a butterfly into a wooded area. He was 4 when he ultimately disappeared. Later, as the policeman tells Ippei and those village kids the story of Takaru, the young man is spotted but runs away when he realizes that he's been seen. It's not long after the policeman chases Takaru to a kind of a natural pool of water that suddenly the water begins to bubble and become a little unstable, and a rock is shot out of the pond, and we see this kind of mound that has a suspicious spot on it that begins to glow, and the whole thing begins to kind of pulsate, almost like it's breathing. Now, as Ippei continues to investigate the story of Takaru, Yuri has collected Jun, who flies his helicopter back to Mount Fuji, and they all reunite in time for that strange glowing rock to collect blasted apart boulders to basically form the rock monster Gorgos. Now, Takaru witnesses the rock monster forming and tries to run away from the rampaging creature, but gets pinned down by a fallen tree. And the next day, Takaru is found and assisted by that friendly policeman, but they are chased into a cave by Gorgos that they soon there get trapped by falling debris that basically blocks the opening of that cave. Now, surprisingly, Takaru has a pretty large amount of strength, and he's able to there's a little bit of a struggle, but it seems almost like he's had to do this before. He pushes the boulder out of the way to get he and the policeman free. Now, Takaru decides to run directly at Gorgos, determined to deal with it himself. He does so by jumping right at Gorgos and climbing on top of the beast. And as he's on Gorgos's back, and while he's still, getting footing, he discovers that pulsating spot that glows on Gorgos. Once Takaru removes the glowing orb from the creature, it collapses lifeless. Takaru even then tosses it up into the air and shoots it with a gun that I think he got from the policeman, and it explodes. Takaru reunites with his long-suffering sister, who believed him dead for about a decade and a half, and he's ultimately returned to society in kind of a nice little happy ending. In Terror of the Sweet Honey, everything begins with a dark and stormy night. There, we see a man breaking into a structure that looks a little bit like a greenhouse, and we'll find out later what that is. He suddenly, we hear him break a window, and he suddenly backs away from it and then runs off into the night. Our narrator tells us that someone has just wandered into the unbalanced zone, and we're going to experience a separation of mind and body. God, I love those opening narrations. But later, June and Ipei are flying in a small plane where they witness a train get derailed by a curious landslide that ultimately blocks the train tracks. And so they go off to report this and kind of get the balls rolling as far as like there being any kind of an investigation of this. Now, meanwhile, we see two young lovers discussing what happened 10 days earlier with the break-in of that structure. That structure was actually a beehive, and what was kind of being worked on there is this experimental stuff called sweet honey jellion, and this jelly is given to the larvae, and it turns these bees into giant bees. And upon further investigation of the hive, it looks as though that all those bee larvae that were given the concentrated honey jellion were destroyed or potentially eaten. Still, yet elsewhere, someone sees a moving mound of dirt, and the ground just kind of, you know, like you would normally see with something under the ground kind of heading towards somebody. Now, out from that mound, much to the surprise and terror of those bee scientists, is Mongula, a giant mole, and they realize quickly that culprit who messed with the queen and her larvae a week and a half earlier, well, it's probably this giant mole fella. Now, the giant mole fella isn't just messing around with trains and showing itself out in the wide open field. It's actually messing up farms all around this area where the bee testing was going down. Yuri, June, and Ipei investigate, and Yuri sees no possible way the mole could have easily gotten into the beehive building because the floor is concrete, the windows have double panes, so nothing like a mole would have been able to break the glass. But then they discover the broken pane from that stormy night. Maybe someone slipped the mole in to destroy the larvae. It's soon discovered that it was an inside job, and one of the scientists was the one who broke into the bee larvae structure. Now, he can be dealt with in time, but a more pressing issue is Mongula. Now, the army shows up, and they soon find our turncoat Itami, who plans to deal with Mongula himself in the mole's cavernous underground trail that he's been building. He says that he was jealous of another one of the scientists, Kimura, because he got a paper accepted by a prestigious science group talking about this honey. So he decided to mess up the experiments. But the mole, could get in, and and then he basically tells everybody, you know what, I'm going to deal with this myself. Everybody get out, and I'm going to blow this tunnel up. So he basically sacrifices his life to blow up the mole's tunnel and also kill the mole itself. But he succeeds in killing himself, but Mongula survives the blast and comes out into the open where the military just blasts the hell out of the creature, forcing him to retreat deeper and deeper into the earth. And by doing so, the poor guy runs into a pocket of magma under the crust, and it fries him. Now, let's get to the three things that I like about episodes 7 and 8 of Ultra Q. Now, first up, I really do like our creatures for these two episodes. Gorgos is an alien that crashed his meteorite or comet into ancient Earth and basically lay dormant until thousands or possibly millions of years later. I like that he kind of constitutes himself from rubble that was just kind of lying around. In a way, I guess that kind of makes him somewhat indestructible when you think about how he really is just made of rock. And he's also kind of derpy looking too. I love a derpy, slow-moving giant monster. Plus, his vocal roar, his scream in this is the same as Godzilla's. So how can I discourage the usage of that? As for Mongula, how can you not like a giant mammal with little beady eyes? And I'll talk a little bit more about him momentarily. Now, in S.O.S. Mount Fuji, I found the plot to kind of contain some interesting things that give a little extra variety that we've often seen in Ultra Q. The previous episode of the series, Grow Up Little Turtle, was about as weird as it comes, with a child befriending a turtle that grows huge very quickly, and then taking him by flying to what seems almost like a place kind of outside of life and death and time and space. It was all very trippy. However, in the very next episode, S.O.S. Mount Fuji, not only do you have your typical monster, but you also have that story with the feral child that was that's grown up and become something of a Tarzan legend. There's kind of a nice reunion of brother and sister, too, as she suffered quite a bit after he went missing many years ago. There is no ominous narration at the end of that episode. It just focuses on the happy sister in the sky being returned to civilization. It's really quite pleasant. Now, thirdly, there is something kind of sympathetic about our monster in Terror of the Sweet Honey. That mole was just doing mole stuff by looking for some food and running into the bee larvae, and that happened to be just super juiced by the sweet jellion. He ate all that stuff, and it had the effect on him similar to those bees. It was some guy's jealousy that created this poor giant creature that had to run away from the military by digging deep into the earth, only for him to burn up in a magma pocket. It does beg the question why the scientists thought that creating a supergiant hive of bees would have exactly been a good idea, but I digress. It's really not focused on too much. It's really this mole guy. But the mole fella didn't do anything himself to lead to getting, missiled all to hell by the military. I kind of hate when a creature is just doing his normal thing, and because some human is a jerkbag, it causes the animal to have something happen to it that then calls the military and the entire might of a country or area to fight it off and or kill it. It sometimes doesn't exactly feel fair. That rock monster in S.O.S. Mount Fuji is a bad creature. This mole just ate honey that it was, kind of granted access to due to a guy being a jerk. Plus, moles are kind of cute, and I have to feel kind of sorry for them anyway because their eyesight's pretty bad. You get what I'm saying? I just feel bad for the mole dude, which then, of course, builds a lot of sympathy for this kind of large but kind of cute monster in this. But anyway, I just like the guy. Now that wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. You can watch or catch new episodes of Monster Mondays each Monday afternoon at filmseizure.com, but don't forget to follow Film Seizure at Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and subscribe to Film Seizure to get both the Film Seizure Podcast and Monster Mondays at your favorite podcast providers. And you can also do so by subscribing to us at YouTube. You can hear the podcast episodes there. You can also check out my website, bmovieanima.com, to read new review articles every Friday morning. Now, we've previously covered the pilot episode of Tales from the Dark Side, so let's dive into the series proper next time with the first two episodes, which are titled The New Man and I'll Give You a Million. So until next week, stay spooky.